notice. I hope you don't mind, and we will have a good meeting all the same. Now, the main speaker, Ben Dyson, studied economics for 2 years and then decided it was time to do something different, and founded the organization Positive Money in 2010. He's working on that campaign full time, and he's one of the board directors there. And he has spent the last 5 years trying to figure out what's wrong with the financial system. He's working on the Positive Money campaign, working with MPs, think tanks, charities, academics and unions to promote a better understanding of the real issue with debt-based money and fractional reserve banking. Ben will speak for 30 minutes. He will give us, you might say, the short version of his lecture on positive money and why we should divide up the money creation and the lending. Now then, 3 panelists will take a seat here in the panel. These are Lilja Mósesdóttir, economist, MP and the chairman of Samstaða, Gylfi Zoëga, professor of economics here at the university and a member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank, and Frosti Sigurjónsson, microeconomist, a member of a Betra monetary system would be the English translation, Betra peningakerfi, and candidates of the Centre Party. They will speak for 3 to 5 minutes after Dyson's talk, and then we will open up for questions. We will try, at this time of day, we don't want to stay here till 3 or 4. At 1:15, the latest, we will close the meeting. So please, scribble down any questions that arise during his talk, and give me a sign anytime if you have a question, and I will create a list even before we open up for the questions, so we won't lose a minute in that. I think that's that for the organization. You all saw that you can buy his book, Dyson and Andrew Jackson, that's your co-author, wrote this book here, Modernizing Money. You can buy it for near £2,000 here outside the hall if you're interested after this talk. Now, I'm not being paid for talking here. You're here to listen to Mr. Ben Dyson. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let's start with the question of where does money come from? And the answer to this should seem obvious because it's written on every single banknote that you see, the central bank of Iceland. But that's not quite the whole story. The truth is that the central bank only actually creates a small percentage of all the money that exists. It's actually just 3% of all the money in the economy that comes from the central bank. So where does the other 97% come from? Well, what normally surprises people is that most of the money that exists is created by banks. It's the big banks that everybody knows and recognizes. So 97% of all the money in the economy is not created by the government or the central bank. It's actually created by the commercial banks. Now, usually when I say this, people don't really believe me the first time. So I just want to show you some people from central banks who have confirmed that this is the way the system works. This is the governor, so the chief executive of the Bank of England, Sir Mervyn King, saying that when banks extend loans to their customers, they create money by crediting their customers' accounts. So when you go into a bank and take out a loan to buy a house that's already too expensive, the money isn't coming from anywhere else. It's not coming from somebody else's savings account. That money is actually just new money that is created through the accounting process that the bank uses. This is a Bank of England paper saying the same thing. By far the largest role in creating broad money, so that's the money supply of the nation, is played by the banking sector. When banks make loans, they create additional deposits for those that borrowed the money. And this is one of the main financial journalists for the Financial Times of London, who just says the essence of the contemporary monetary system is the creation of money out of nothing by private banks, often foolish lending. So most of the money that exists is created by banks, and it's created when they make loans. And this is what has happened in Iceland with the amount of money in the economy. So you can see this red line down at the bottom is the money created by the central bank in the form of paper notes and coins. And then this blue line is the money created by the four main banks in Iceland through lending, through the accounting process that they use. And you can see how just in the few years before the financial crisis, this really expanded very quickly. The same thing happened in the UK. This is what happened over 40 years in the UK with the money created by banks. And again, in the last few years before the crisis, this money creation was faster than ever before in history. So if banks are creating all this money essentially out of nothing, who decides how that money is going to be used in the economy? And the reality is it's actually the boards of the banks, the people at the very top, who make decisions about, do we want this bank to invest in property or in real businesses, or do we want to invest in, for example, the financial markets? So this small number of people at the very top of some of the big banks is making decisions on how to allocate and how to spend about 97% of the money that exists. And in the UK in particular, most of this money didn't go to businesses, it didn't go to the real non-financial economy. 40% of all the money they created in the 10 years before the crisis went into housing. So obviously this pushed up house prices. 37% went into the financial markets, so the financial markets did very well. And just 13% went into businesses. Into the real economy, the part that actually contributes to the GDP figures for the economy. And another 10% went into consumer loans and credit cards, personal loans. So almost 80% of all the money that banks were creating was going into financial markets and the property market. So what's the consequence of this? Well, firstly, if you give banks the power to create too much money, if you give banks the power to create money, they will create too much of it. Because the more money they create, the more loans they can make, and the more loans they make, the more interest and profits they receive on those loans. So they have an incentive to always try to create too much money. And this is what happens. They create that money for the wrong things. So most of the money that banks create goes into property and financial markets, and very little actually goes into the real economy. And this causes financial crises. And my organisation's been arguing for about 3 years that the financial crisis was caused by allowing banks to create money. Everybody else at the time was talking about other things like CDOs and or lending. But 4 weeks ago, the chairman of the Financial Services Authority in the UK actually said this. He said the financial crisis of 2008 occurred because we failed to constrain the private financial system's creation of private credit and money. So this idea that the crisis was caused by allowing banks to create money has now become mainstream, and it's been discussed in political circles and at the top of the main regulator in the UK. It also causes debt, because if banks create money when they make loans, then for every additional 1,000 kroners in the economy, there will also be 1,000 kroners of debt. And this is a chart for the UK, but you can see that the debt now is actually higher than the amount of money in the economy. This situation applies in essentially around the world. So as the amount of money goes up, the debt also rises. But then if people try to pay off the debt, then the amount of money will shrink in the economy as well. So then you have a recession. It also contributes to inequality because all of the money that we're using has to be borrowed from the banking sector, and we have to pay interest on this borrowed money. In the UK, I'm sorry I don't have the figures for Iceland for this, but in the UK, this transfer of income from the public back to the big banks is between 108 billion and 217 billion pounds every year. So if you do that per person, it's about 450,000 kroners per person across the economy that is being paid back to the banking sector. And we've done studies on the effects of this, and what it does is it transfers money from the bottom 90% of the population to the very top 10%. So it's really making inequality worse. And it's also the reason why houses have become so expensive. We hear people arguing a lot of the time that houses are expensive because we haven't built enough of them. This is a situation in the UK, what politicians often argue. But the reality is that this purple line shows house prices over 20 years in the UK. The green line at the bottom is the number of people in the country, the population. And this red line, which is slightly above it, is the number of houses. So the amount of houses in the country was growing faster than the amount of people. So it's not that there's too many people that is making houses expensive. What the problem is this blue line at the top, which was mortgage lending. Now, remember that every loan that a bank makes creates new money. So all of this money that was going into property was newly created money that pushed up house prices. This is why house prices have become so expensive in the UK, in Iceland, in America, in most of Europe, and even the same thing is happening in China now. Banks have been allowed to create all this money. They put most of it into property because that's where they can get the quickest returns. And this is what happens to house prices. And obviously these house prices are growing much, much faster than people's salaries and people's ability to actually pay these prices. And it also has implications for the environment, because firstly, with banks deciding where to allocate all of the new money, they tend to go for the things that will give them the short-term profits, and that tends to be things like oil, often the arms industry. So they invest in things that might not be in the best interest of the environment or society in the long term. Also, this monetary system causes crises, causes financial crises. When we have a financial crisis, possibly not so much here, but definitely in other countries, what happens is the government says, well, we can't afford to protect the environment right now because we have a financial crisis and we don't have enough money anymore. So all of these environmental protections and laws to protect the environment that have been developed over 10 or 20 years, when there's a financial crisis, the government tries to take all these away because they say they're too expensive. And there's also the fact that you have, some economists think that this current debt-based monetary system is causing something that they call forced growth, which means that we have to always keep the economy growing, even if that just leads to more debt and more environmental destruction, because there is so much debt that if businesses aren't growing and the economy isn't growing, it becomes impossible to continue paying the debt. And the debt exists because of the way that money is currently created by banks making loans. And then when you do have a financial crisis, it makes it really difficult to get the economy to recover, because when money is created by banks when they make loans, it means that if you want to put more money into the economy, you have to try and get banks to lend more. That's the only real way of putting money into the economy. But the crisis was caused because people had too much debt. So we also want to reduce the debt. But if you want people to pay down their debts in the current system, then they'll do that using money which was created by banks. And when they use that money to pay off the debt, the amount of money in the economy starts to shrink. And this is when you get a recession. So we have a money supply where, a monetary system where we have to keep on taking more debt from banks to keep the money growing. And as soon as we stop increasing the level of debt, then the economy starts to shrink, to contract. What we need right now is we need to have less debt in the economy, but we also need to have more money to allow us to pay off that debt. And that's actually impossible because of the structure of the current monetary system. So we've been arguing, again, for the last 3 years in the UK that you can't solve this crisis by trying to get banks to lend more money to people who already have too much debt. And again, the chairman of the Financial Services Authority just 4 weeks ago said that the success of monetary policy depends in large part on persuading households to increase mortgage debt or businesses to borrow more money. We got into this mess because of excessive creation of private credit and money. We should be concerned if our only escape route implies building up a future excess. So the very policies that the central banks and governments have been using around the world to try and solve the crisis, like lowering interest rates and trying to encourage banks to lend more, is exactly what caused the crisis in the first place. And now Adair Turner at the Financial Services Authority is saying that if we do the same thing again now, this is only going to lay the foundations for the next financial crisis. So we need to do something different. And there are alternatives to this current monetary system. Again, Martin Wolf, who is probably the most credible journalist writing for the Financial Times, has been writing about this issue quite a lot, asking why is it that banks are allowed to create all of the money for the economy when actually it's had such a harmful effect. What he said recently was, it is a normal monetary system in which the printing of money is delegated to commercial banks that need spending. This delegates a core public function, the creation of money, to a private and often irresponsible commercial oligopoly. So even people who are part of the economics mainstream are now starting to question the way the current monetary system works. And again, Adair Turner, in the speech that he gave, talked about something that he calls overt money finance, which is completely economist jargon. But basically what he was saying is, instead of doing things like quantitative easing, which has happened in the US and the UK, of creating this money and putting it into financial markets, if you actually created this money and gave it to the government to spend into the economy, then it would go right into the real economy instead of the financial markets. And what that would do is that would create jobs and help the economy grow. So he was saying that if you actually put this money directly into people's pockets, essentially, through government spending, or actually just giving everybody a check for the money that was created, this would actually get the economy going much faster than all of the policies that the government has been using. So we have worked on this proposal over the last 3 years of how you can actually change this monetary system. And I'm just going to explain quickly how this works. The first step is to take this power that banks have to create money away from them. And the way you do this, I don't want to go into accounting and balance sheets and the technical details, but essentially, right now, because of the way the accounting works, when banks make loans, they can effectively do it by entering a new number into your bank account. What we would do is we would take this ability away through some technical changes that are made to the way they operate. And what would happen is, as a customer of a bank, when you go into your bank with your salary, you would have two options. You either say to the bank, look, I want this money to be kept safe. Or you say, I want you to take this money and invest it for me. And if you ask the bank to keep your money safe, then this would be kept in a special type of account, which would be basically like your current or checking account now. So you would still have a debit card, maybe a checkbook, and your salary would be paid into this account. But then the bank wouldn't be able to use that money for anything else. So it stays your money, and it just waits there until you decide to spend it or to move it to somewhere else. On the other hand, if you actually put your money into an investment account, which is like a savings account, then you're saying to the bank, okay, I know that you're going to go and invest this money somewhere in the economy. I know that there will be some risk. I don't expect the government to give me the money back if you lose the money. And what this does is it separates banks into the job of keeping money safe for people who want their money to be safe, and the job of investing money for those who want their money to be invested. And it makes banks into what most people think they are today. So they actually take money from savers and lend it to borrowers. This is completely different from the current system where banks are actually creating new money to make the loans that they make. So then you need to take this power to create money away from the banks and then return it to some kind of transparent and accountable and democratic process. So what we suggest is, we know from history that you can't trust the banks with the power to create money because of what has happened over the last 5 or 6 years. But I guess most people wouldn't trust politicians either, because politicians would have the same reason to try and create too much money as the banks. They create lots of money before an election to boost the economy, and then afterwards this causes inflation and all these kinds of economic problems. So we can't just give politicians the power to create money either. What you need to do is separate two decisions. So the decision over how much new money you want to create, and the decision over how that money will be used, what it can be spent on. And what we suggest is that you have what we call a money creation committee, but this might be like the monetary policy committee at the central bank, the Bank of Iceland, that would look at the economy and say, okay, we need to increase the amount of money in the economy by 1 or 2% this year. They would create that money and then give that money to the government, and then the government could either spend it into the economy, or it could distribute it actually directly to citizens. And you need to make sure that that money is only created when inflation is low. So what happens at the moment is, when banks are creating money, it happens like this. They put more money into the system, and this pushes up prices. They think that that means the economy is healthy. So when they see house prices and things go up, they think, look, the economy is doing really well now, so we can afford to lend even more to housing. And the money supply starts expanding even faster, and some people start to say, well, this is a bubble, this is going to crash. But you get people arguing, no, everything's fine. And then you have the financial crisis. What would happen if the Bank of Iceland had responsibility for creating money and the banks didn't have this power, is that they would put some money into the economy, and once it's caused inflation, they would need to stop until inflation starts to come down again. When it gets to zero, then you can put more money into the economy, and then you start creating money again. So instead of having this with the banks creating money, the line at the top, you would have a much lower increase in the money supply, and you wouldn't have all this new money flooding into financial markets and into property markets and pushing up house prices. So you would have a much more stable economy. And then the next thing is that when you create this money, so remember in the current monetary system, every new krona that comes into the economy comes with a krona of debt. So when banks are making loans, the debt and the money in the economy is going up at the same time. That means that there is debt for all the money that exists. And we have this problem that we need less debt and more money in the economy, but it's not possible in the current system. So this is the situation you have in the UK right now. The debt reached the maximum just after the financial crisis, and now as people are paying down debt, the money supply of the economy is shrinking as well. So this is like when you take the oil out of the engine of your car. Pretty soon everything stops working. and you continue to have a recession. What the government is trying to do now is to get banks lending again, and that means that this will happen. The debt will go up and the money supply will go up again. And then in another 2 or 3 years we'll have another financial crisis because we did exactly the same thing that caused the first financial crisis. If you change the monetary system and you allow the central bank to create money without the debt attached, then actually you can change this relationship. So the money supply can keep increasing, but the debt can continue to fall as people pay off all debts and new money comes into the economy. And then instead of having this huge distribution of income from the bottom 90% to the top 10% through the banking sector, this will be significantly lower. It could be half of this. The level of debt could fall by about half or 60%. And then you need to put this money into the real economy. So right now banks create money and put most of it into property markets and financial markets. Neither of those markets contribute to GDP. So when you hear people talking about the economy growing, they're not talking about property or financial markets, they're talking about real jobs and real businesses in the high street, factories, small businesses that are outside of the financial sector. So in terms of how you get the money into the economy, you could either spend more on public services, you could cut taxes. A left-wing government would do the first option, a right-wing government would probably cut taxes. You could use it to pay down the national debt, or you could actually just divide the money up between the citizens and give everybody a check for their percentage. What this would do, whereas the current system works like this, most of the money is created by banks, goes into housing and financial markets, and then some of that money eventually reaches the real economy. And just about 10% of the money that banks create goes into the real economy. It will be different because the money would come from the Money Creation Committee, probably at the Bank of Iceland. It would go to the government. It would be spent into the real economy, and then businesses and people who work in the real economy, if they want to, can lend that money to the bank by putting it into an investment or savings account. And then the bank is able to lend it on to other people, either to housing or to financial markets, or back to other parts of the real economy. Okay, and then the final thing that we need to do is give ourselves, as customers of banks, some kind of control and transparency over how our money is used. So right now you put your money into the bank and you don't know anything about what's happening to that money. The government says if the bank loses your money, we'll use taxpayers' money to give you your money back. What we would like to see is that the bank would actually need to tell you, okay, if you put your money into this account, we're going to use it in the stock market in New York. And because of this, the risk will be this high. Or if you put it into this account, we'll use it for businesses in Iceland, in which case the risk will be much lower. And you actually have transparency over how that money is used and how much risk has been taken. If you don't want your money to be used for the arms industry, for example, the bank would need to tell you if they're going to use it for that, and you have the option to say, I don't want to use this account, give me something else. Okay. So just to recap that, first thing to do is remove the power of banks to create money. You need to return that power to a transparent and accountable body. You create this money free of debt so that you can reduce the private household debt whilst the money supply continues to go up. You only create money when inflation is low. This is in contrast to what banks do at the moment, which is create money as quickly as they can until there's a financial crisis. You need to make sure that this new money goes into the real economy instead of financial markets, and you do that by spending the money into the economy through government spending or either distributing it directly to people instead of allowing banks to create this money for property and financial markets. And then give customers control and transparency over how that money is invested. So this sounds like To economists who have studied the existing system and been taught that this is the natural way for a banking system to work, this all sounds very radical. But actually we're not as radical as a paper from the International Monetary Fund, which recently came out and suggested the same kind of reform. They use something called DSG economic modelling, which I won't explain, but it's essentially the very complicated economic models that the International Monetary Fund and organisations like the World Bank and the main economists use to predict what will happen to the economy. What they say is that if you take this power to create money away from the banks, you get much better control of business cycles, so you don't have this boom-bust economy that we've had for the last few decades. You don't have bank runs because the people that wanted their money to be safe know that their money is always there, actually in the bank, and kept safe. You get a big fall in the national debt, and you get an increase in the economic growth by about 10%. So actually this is, it sounds radical, but the International Monetary Fund even has done some work on this and found that this will be beneficial for the economy and would actually work much more effectively than the proposals that governments are currently proposing. So this is the proposal that is outlined in the book. You can also get a much shorter version from the Positive Money website. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Met with the Business and Economy Committee of the Parliament this morning and presented these ideas. He hasn't really, he didn't say anything about how you were received there. He might maybe tell us a little bit about that afterwards. But I can ask the panelists to, give their response in about 3 to 5 minutes before we start taking questions. But you can start giving me a sign and I will put you on the list. We'll just go this line. Gylfi, you will start.
The first point is that capitalism is a messy system. Recessions do occur. Banks are an integral part of the capitalist system, and they serve the purpose of allocating a nation's savings between investors, entrepreneurs, and firms. You can see the banks are like the heart of the capitalist system, crucial. And in history, they have served a purpose. They've served their purpose. We have, in the past 300-400 years, since fractional banking was started in the 17th century, had unprecedented growth of output, unprecedented improvements in our standard of living. We have the great American railroads of the 19th century, financed partially through bank financing. Currently we have China, massive credit expansion, terribly messy, but hundreds of millions of people brought out of poverty. There will be a financial crisis in China one day. It will be a cleansing operation. So in the capitalist system, we have recessions that clean out the unviable businesses, get rid of the excessive debt. But it's a system that has, through its institutions, banks, the fractional reserve banking, the corporation, the stock market, and so forth, created unprecedented standards of political living, which we, only since the 18th century, has mankind had such opportunities. So capitalism is messy, and recessions do occur. They serve a purpose, and to completely castrate banks as a source of all evil will also let the baby out with the bathwater. So we have a safe system, but we lose a lot of the dynamism as far as I can see. Second point, Second point is that in this system we do have instruments. So we have the central bank can use its reserve requirements to rein in credit creation. The Bank of England didn't do that, and in this country, our central bank did not, for some obscure reason, use its tools to reduce credit creation before 2008. It lowered the reserve requirements from 4% to 2% in 2003. For some mysterious reason, did not increase it in 2004, 5, 6, 7. So it was a failure, a massive failure of policy to let credit expand like this. It would have been easy to reduce credit creation here, and the Bank of England could have done the same. It was the fashion of central bankers at the time not to use reserve requirements, and now they learned a lesson. Point number three is that the question is, do we better trust the private sector, so our bankers with all their flaws, to allocate capital between businesses and entrepreneurs, or should we give the money to the politicians? And I think, although now the risks of giving the money creation powers to the private banks are clear to everyone. If you're over 25, you remember the alternative in this country, and the alternative of having politicians allocate capital is even more disastrous. Fourth point, and now there's only one after that. It reminds me, 100 years ago in this country, there was a private bank. Probably not a good bank. It went bust around 1930. It helped create enormous growth that occurred in this country in the first decades of the 20th century. It went bust. I'm sure it was related to party lending. It wasn't a good bank. It created lots of money and so forth. It went bust, and the response was to have only state banks. It went bust. By the way, the depositors were not compensated. They lost everything they had in there. You could have made the same points then. And the response was to give the money creation power and the power to allocate the nation's savings to politicians. And this happened. It was a state bank that took over. But that was not an improvement. The politicians. By the way, I think it was the Progressive Party also who did that. It's like every generation goes through the same motions. And the fifth point is, there were some details. I think I'm supposed to play the devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Because they're keen on this, so I'm supposed to be. So the fifth point is that in your presentation, the IMF staff paper does not constitute IMF policy. It's just a paper that always has these words. This is not the official policy of IMF. That's number one. And also the people you cited, they have other views. Martin Wolf's explanation of the financial crisis is it's more comprehensive. There are other factors in there also. And that's another point. One point more is that you see, the housing is part of GDP. And building houses is part of GDP. And houses need to be built. And financial markets do provide some service. And they should be part of GDP. I think there was one last point here somewhere. Yeah, I mean, all these things you mentioned, like inequality has increased. But there are other reasons why inequality has increased. You know, the trade with China that has suppressed the income of the average bloke in the UK. The financiers profit from that. In fact, the fractional reserve banking is a part of it. It's not the whole story. The same thing with all the other stuff that is here. No, ending on a more positive note. What the world needs is a different kind of banking system that nurtures entrepreneurs, long-term relationships, social relationships with borrowers and so forth. So the banks we've had in the past 10 years have performed very badly. And it's not the kind of banks we need. Banks that make life investments, make accounting profits and so forth. We need old-fashioned banking, an old-fashioned economy where people have long-term relationships and responsibility is rewarded and caution. Okay, so I'm finished with my 30 minutes now.
Just to thank Ben for a very comprehensive, clear presentation. When I started looking at these ideas, and I went to Ben's website and posted money to study the explanations they had for the monetary system and how it actually could be reformed, I had very serious doubts if it really could be that easy. If it was really possible to reform the banking system without, killing all the firstborn sons and everything. It was really too simple, actually. Just passing a law to prohibit the banks from creating new money out of nothing and using it for their own purposes. It is very important to realize, in my business where I come from, is we make computer software most of the time, and when we discover a huge flaw in the system, it is our duty to fix it. The current banking system, even if we had under the current system, we would call it fractional reserve, a great progress in the history of humanity, and it is not because of the faulty banking system, it's despite of it, is my conclusion. If we had had a better working system that would have nurtured a more sustainable growth, a more stable growth, instead of booms and busts, we would have used our resources more wisely and we would not be all in debt like we are today. It's not just in Iceland, it's everywhere on the planet. There is too much debt, and people are much poorer than they needed to be. And there is much more disparity between rich and poor than it has to be. And this system has actually served as a method to extract value from the system for the benefits of the few. And it's gone way too far. And my options after discovering the power of the system was only two resources: is to start a bank or own one, or tell everybody. But it's very important that we understand as citizens who makes the money and what does it mean. And I think he explained very much what the very serious implications are and what went wrong with the studies. But the opportunity for us here is very big. Iceland actually suffers from very bad consequences from the last crisis. We have to learn from this, and we have to do better than others. We cannot be inside the box. We are far outside the box as a country already. And the solutions, we cannot just use bandages on the old system. We really have to fix it. And we have looked at many different alternatives, some very dramatic, and such as, for example, adopting new currencies or joining another currency union. These are very, very big steps, and they're very difficult to reverse without cost. Whereas this system, migrating to a fuller reform system, a full reserve system, is actually can be done. We can ease ourselves into it over a number of years, and we can say it's not working. We can track back without any cost. There is no cost of actually doing this experiment, and certainly no cost in studying the benefits and costs of doing this. So that's maybe my point.
Explain how politics comes into this, because we were just coming from a meeting of the Committee for Economic and Business Affairs, where Ben Dyson and Professor Richard Warner, Richard is a professor in international banking in England, they were explaining this full reserve system for the committee members, because I have put forward a proposition suggesting that Alþingi puts up a committee of experts looking into this matter, and not only saying whether this is desirable, but also going through the mechanism of doing this. And together with us at the committee meeting were also staff from the central bank. But the reason why I got interested in this positive money idea is that after my experience as a chair of the business committee in Alþingi, where we worked on the re-regulation of the banking sector, and we realized that we were not kind of preventing another asset bubble from arising with our re-regulation. We were not able to make sure that there was not too much money being printed. Also, we realized that if one of our three main banks would fail, we would not be, it would take us about 70 years to have large enough deposit fund in order to pay out the guarantee. 70 years. And actually we kind of thought, well, I mean, we can't really establish a deposit guarantee fund. What we have now is just a declaration from the government that deposits are guaranteed, but there's not enough money behind this guarantee, as all of you know. Also, we raised the equity ratio for the banks in order to reduce the power to print money and also to have some assets in case they had to write down debt. This will not really hinder the banks in printing money. The higher equity rates went from 8 to 16, but actually they are around 22%, I think now. Because banks can actually just lend money. They're not allowed to lend money to their owners. We put that into the legislation, but they can lend money to the staff, you know, and make it a deposit. All of these regulations we tried to implement are not really fixing the problem that led up to the financial crisis. Also, it's quite obvious that the competition in the financial market is very unfair because the banks are competing with the pension funds and investors on very unfair terms because the banks can just make a deposit in order to overbid a pension fund, as an example. So, I mean, that to allow banks to print money doesn't increase or secure competition. Also, I think it's very high time that we actually calculate, and I don't know about any economic study, calculating the cost of the current banking system that allows banks to print money. I mean, what's the cost of having once in a while, like Gylfi was talking about, booms and busts? What's the cost for the ordinary people? Nobody has calculated that. What's the cost of this idea of positive money? I would like to see cost-benefit analysis of these two systems. And one final point. Many of you are in favor of as in joining the EU and are concerned about that this kind of reform that prevents the banks from printing money will throw us out of the European economic zone. No, the reforms are not that radical. They will not change the international transaction. We are just changing the way we print kronas. That has nothing to. That's our currency. That's and then in the foreign exchange we change that currency to another currency. That's a different thing.
The first one, gentleman here in the second chair. And I would ask you to maybe introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, my name is Júlíus Valdimarsson. I want to start by thanking Lilja and Samstaða as well as Frosti and his organization for making this meeting possible, and their very good work in promoting those ideas. They go very well in the same direction as the proposals of the Communist Party, in the same direction. My question is to Gylfi. Firstly, in the university, the students of economics, are they being taught about ideas such as Ben Dyson is promoting, or only the mainstream ideas of economics? And do you think, Gylfi, that what you hear here will contribute to a possible change, that the University of Iceland will start to teach those ideas in the university, just as they are teaching the mainstream ideas?
Thank you very much. The gentleman over there in the red shirt, right? You have to run.
Hello, my name is Gylfi. I was thinking about if we join the euro, then our printing powers are gone. The central bank can't print money. And how would this committee you were proposing work then? The committee was supposed to, print money. Thank you.
How the question is how the MCC would work in Iceland would join the euro. Gentleman over here, closer. Take it in the right order.
Yeah, thank you for this meeting. It's always good to have an enlightened discussion about the fundamentals of the monetary system. These ideas are pretty radical. They mean a lot of change, and they can endanger our situation in the EEA because of the general banking regulation framework. And even depending on the way that money is created, if it is the politicians that do it, we are going, at least half the way to communism. But the question is, can we achieve many of the same goals within the current system? So, like Gylfi was saying, by increasing reserve requirements, by increasing the capital adequacy ratios, and even within the current system, in savings and loans institutions and banks that would only cater to savers and individuals, you can actually have safe deposits in institutions that are not lending with a lot of risk. So why would you need this extremely radical reform? You can do many of the things that you want to achieve in the current system. Thank you.
And then the gentleman there.
Yes, thank you for this interesting lecture. My name is Gylfi Zoëga. I was wondering, the base, assuming that this would work in a small scale, you would not have a contamination and things like that. But isn't the core problem to invent such a system just the global capitalism, the free flow of finances? And part of why we were reducing the reserve level in Iceland in 2003 was to make our banks as competitive as the other banks. And so if we handicap our banks, then the bank business will just go abroad. The banks abroad can lend our willing householders mortgage. That's a problem. So wouldn't this, well, of course in Iceland we have this now currency restrictions, so we could maybe function in an island, but in general you would need everything to change at the same time. You cannot adopt it in a single country, can you?
Thank you very much. I think we will have the first round of answers and then the second round of questions.
Yeah, here we have extensive sections about financial crisis in the world and in this country. We go over this, what could possibly cause it, and what are the solutions. Now, this particular solution has only been proposed here today, so it takes some time to incorporate, but we can So this hasn't been taught in classes, this particular solution here. But financial crisis are very much part of the students today. Actually, the passion in teaching economics in the past about 30 years in the world has been to teach students that markets are efficient, that people are rational, we don't have to worry about anything. But we've still managed to retain a lot of what was taught before 1980, 1970. We used to be criticized for that. 10 years ago, criticized for teaching this old-fashioned stuff, which is now become very useful. Okay, anyway, we try to do our best. But I think Vilhelm's point, I think is very good, because the system really sets reserve requirements at 100% for liquid deposits. And so there are two extremes. The current practice of not using reserve requirements at all, in spite of bank credit expanding by 30–40% a year, not to do anything. And this is a proposal to set it at 100%, the complete opposite extreme. So the question is, why don't we try first to do something in between? So I think should be done, that creation of bank credit should be monitored, not just the inflation rate, but how much credit is created. And that can be controlled by central banks, can affect that. No, if they're incompetent. If central banks are useless, if the supervisors are useless, then this may be some other thing. But are you saying that?
Can you do it with just changing the regulations? Well, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the regulations don't actually work even when they are applied. The whole thing about reserve requirements, when a bank comes to the central bank and says, look, we've created too much money and now we need some money at the central bank to pay the other banks that we've, that the money has gone to. If the central bank says we're not going to give you anything more because you've exceeded your reserve requirement, then this bank becomes unable to pay the next one. That bank is then unable to pay another bank, and the entire system can seize up and stop working, within the space of a day. So generally, whatever the reserve requirement is, if a bank comes to the central bank and says we need more money, they more or less have to say yes. So reserve requirements don't really work as a limit on how much the money supply can expand. Now the thing about the university is, in universities it's still taught that the central bank can say, okay, the reserve requirement is 10%, therefore for every 10 kroners, the banking system can only create 100 kroners. And actually, this other book that we wrote, I'm afraid I only have one copy, but this is basically a textbook for the UK monetary system. And on the back we have David Miles, who's a member of the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England, saying the way monetary economics and banking is taught in many, maybe most universities is very misleading. What this book does is help explain how the mechanics of the system work. So this is a book that we put together with some colleagues to say that the common understanding of how you restrict this money creation actually is completely out of date. And in terms of how it works under the euro system, I mean, I wouldn't advise going into the euro right now. It's another currency that has failed, like most other currencies. But in that system, you would need to have some kind of central money creation committee who would decide how much to increase the money by across the economy, and then hopefully they would share it out equally between the countries. But yeah, I probably wouldn't advise that. And in terms of why do we need to be so radical? The reform that we are suggesting has actually already been done in the UK in 1844. And at that time, banks had the power to create paper money, and they overused this power. They created too much paper money, and that caused a financial crisis. So the government stepped in. It was the Conservative government of the day actually stepped in and said, from this point on, banks will not be allowed to issue their own paper money. Only the central bank will be able to issue paper money. But what they did then, in 1844, was they didn't imagine electricity and electronic payments and debit cards and internet banking. So now we have a situation where 97% of all the money is electronic, and the law has never been updated to take account of electronic money. So if it's a problem to have banks printing their own paper money, why is it okay to have them printing their own electronic money?
I just want to, because I think we had a question about whether it was wise to give it to the politicians, the powers. I think Gylfi mentioned this. And I think it's a very important part of the suggestions by Poster Money is to take the money power and split it up into two entities. Now it's unified. Both the quantity power and the allocation power is now situated with the lending officer in the bank. He can decide, or she can decide, whether to increase the money supply by making a loan. And who will get this loan and for what purpose? This power is now in one entity, and it is a fertile ground for corruption, as you can imagine. And actually we saw this crony corruption happen just a few years ago here. The solution is to split up these two powers and leave the quantity question and the power to increase the money supply to specialists working at the central bank. But they should not have the power to decide on what to use the new money for. This has to be decided democratically. And we have a process for doing this in Félag, or the bill, when we make the bill in government. We decide as a people who to vote for. And if we vote for right-wing government, they will decide to use the new money to lower taxes. If we vote for left-wing government, we will do something else, and if we will vote for central party, that will do something sensible with the money. So it's democratic. That's the point. Another point was made here, but will Icelandic banks be competitive as organisation afterwards, after we strip them of this profitable resource of creating the money supply and lending it to us? Money supply we could have created ourselves, at no cost to ourselves. And I just calculated that they will lose probably an income stream of 30 to 40 billion annually. Now, if you feel very sorry for them, we should please continue and allow them this money stream. But I think there's a fine job and a very healthy indoors job to just help people save money and find good opportunities to lend them to. And I think they will be very competitive with foreign banks because, for example, if a German bank would like to lend euros into Iceland, the Icelandic companies would have to be able to show that they have an income stream in euros to be adequate lenders for this currency. A German bank would not be able to create kronas, and they would not be stupid enough to lend euros to a company that only has income in Icelandic kronas. But for example, if we have a company that is truly generating euros, then they can actually call to the German bank and say, we'd like to do business with you. So it would not be stopping anybody from using what currency is most beneficial. And it will not stop our banks from being competitive inside our market.
My name is Lilja Mósesdóttir. This is very difficult for the public to understand. And even in this meeting it's in English, okay. But are you talking about creating money, a committee, money creation committee? Will they be able to stop the banks from making a bubble like in the housing market here in Iceland? And also there was a big bubble in the share in the banks, in all kinds of companies. Are you talking about that something so you can explain, well, me, maybe to some other people, what really is being talked about, something simple? Thank you.
Right there in the back.
Thank you for the meeting. The thing is, like here in Iceland, the bank crisis, it's the same all around the world. It's private banks that were lending too much, and the question is, how is it, it's forbidden to government to run banks, isn't it? And I think maybe some nations, like 8 nations, have to follow up on financial system of each nation. Is it like that, or can you answer me that? And well, there was one more question, I forgot it. Thank you.
The gentleman over here.
Thank you for this meeting. My name is Gylfi Zoëga. I have a question for Gylfi. Mr. Dyson maintains that if you try to get us out of the current situation as far as debt and money in the system is concerned, we will only be able to do so by creating more money and more debt, and we don't want to go down that road. Does Gylfi have a different solution, and how long would it take to solve the problem?
Thank you. And then you have a question as well, didn't you? Yeah, the last one over there.
I was wondering how these reforms are supposed to address the problem that we are facing in this country. So the technical means by which the bubble was created, which was essentially price counterfeiting, accomplished by market merry-go-rounds, where capital assets were passed from one party to another and inflated in each round, possibly many rounds. Now, how exactly is this going to technically stop that process? Thank you.
Frosti said you can take this step by step. We could go the Danish way and change íbúðalánasjóð, the housing institute, into a 100% reserve system, which means that íbúðalánasjóður has to match the loan to the household with the investors on the other side. So it's not a pool like it's now. Actually the pension funds are investing more or less through the íbúðalánasjóð in the housing loan of the individual house. This is one example. And this is the system in Denmark, which RIC or the Labour Confederation is suggesting we should take up. I think the only radical part with this idea that the money creation goes from the banks to the central bank is that it's not found in any other country for the whole economy. And Icelandic, especially Icelandic economists, are very afraid of going against the mainstream, or maybe we also as a nation are afraid to go against the mainstream. But remember that the monetary policy that failed before the crash was a mainstream policy from New Zealand and is practiced in Sweden and the UK. And that didn't save us very much.
Basis, there's no reason why you can't do it in one country alone. The way the international monetary system works in terms of how different currencies are exchanged, this doesn't impact that at all. And then really there's no reason why you shouldn't do it. I mean, I think it's important to recognise the situation that you're in the moment in Iceland. You're relying on 4 banks that have already failed to create your money supply and to decide where in the economy that money should be invested in. And you know, it's the same in the UK. The system failed in the UK, it failed in the US, it failed in Iceland. In China, the level of debt is higher than it ever has been. House prices are as unaffordable as they ever have been. And also I think the level of non-performing loans, so bad loans in the banking system in China, is going the same way. So everybody was, for a while, people were saying, yeah, but China's done this the right way. They've allowed the money supply to expand and it's boosted the Chinese economy. it's going to crash in a year or two. They've done exactly the same as we have done with our economies, but they're just 2 years behind.
Yeah, so, right, mainstream policies. So 100 years ago, people were moving the power to allocate funds from the private banks to state banks, and politicians got involved. 10 years ago, this is an interesting country. Only 10 years ago, we had our banks privatized, and this is not mainstream. It was just, I mean, anyone could understand this, that the power to create money was given to people who had other business interests, who liked to create money for themselves and their friends, and they were affiliated with the political powers in this country. And the institutions of government were very weak. And there was a period of, you could say, lawlessness for a few years. This is nothing mainstream. What a capitalist country needs is law and order, property rights, proper supervision, regulation. It needs officials, government officials, who are objective, who are cautious, conservative, and who make sure the country is okay. A capitalist system without law and order, without this regulatory framework, will lead to disaster. Capitalism is such a powerful force that if you just let it run and believe in Adam Smith's invisible hand and pray, it will bring disaster. Now, as a response, do we then eliminate fractional banking? Maybe, but only as a last resort if we fail at setting up proper institutions of government. So, not today, maybe in a year.
That's that. Thank you very much for being here with